My name is Ronan, and at 32, I've built a life I'm proud of. From the window of my downtown Austin apartment, I can see the city skyline stretching out, a landscape of glass and steel that glitters under the Texas sun. It's a view that costs more than my mom used to make in an entire year, and some mornings it still doesn't feel real. I'm a senior data analyst at a major tech firm, a job with a title that sounds complicated, but really just means I find stories hidden in numbers. And the story my own numbers tell is one of success. A good salary, solid investments, a life of stability I never dared to dream of as a kid. The peace I've found here is my most valuable asset. My apartment is my sanctuary, a place of clean lines, minimalist furniture, and quiet. I have a routine that I stick to: up at 6 for a run along the river, a strong cup of black coffee while I review market trends, and then an 8-hour day of diving into complex datasets. In the evenings, I'll either meet up with a few close friends, Leo, Maya, and Ben, or I'll just stay in, put on some old vinyl, and cook myself a decent meal. It's a simple, predictable life, but its predictability is what makes it so beautiful to me. It's the polar opposite of the chaos that defined my childhood. I thought I had successfully buried that past. I thought the thousands of miles between Austin and the rundown Ohio town I grew up in were enough to keep the ghosts away. I'd worked hard, fought for every opportunity, and believed I'd finally outrun the shadow of the man who was supposed to be my father. I had proven to myself and to the world that I didn't need him, that I was better off without him. For more than 20 years, that belief was the foundation I built my entire life on. But then, one warm autumn evening, everything changed. I was sitting on my couch, laptop open, half watching a baseball game on TV, when a sharp, insistent knock echoed from my front door. It was an unusual sound. My friends always text first, and deliveries are left with the concierge. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach as I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. For a moment, I didn't recognize the faces staring back. One was a man in his late 50s, his face lined with a life I knew nothing about, but his eyes, those were the same cold, calculating eyes I remembered. Beside him stood a young woman, maybe 18 or 19, with an impatient, bored expression, her attention glued to her phone. My hand froze on the doorknob. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. Couldn't be. Not after all this time. But it was. It was Silas, my father. And the young woman had to be the daughter he'd had with his new family, my half-sister. The ghosts I thought I'd outrun had finally caught up. They had found me, and with that one knock, the quiet, stable world I had so carefully constructed was about to be torn apart. I was 9 years old when my world fell apart. We were living in a small, perpetually damp rental house in Ohio, the kind with windows that rattled every time a truck drove by. My mom, Alara, worked at a local diner, and my dad, Silas, did odd jobs, never holding one for more than a few months. Most of my memories from that time are of them arguing, their voices rising and falling behind the thin wall of my bedroom. The arguments were always about the same thing: money, or rather, the lack of it. The final argument happened on a Tuesday. I remember because it was meatloaf night. I was in my room, trying to finish my math homework, but their shouting was too loud to ignore. It was different this time, sharper, more final. I heard my mom's voice, pleading, then cracking with tears. Then I heard the slam of a closet door and the heavy thud of a suitcase being thrown on the floor. I crept out of my room and peeked around the corner. Silas was standing by the front door with a worn-out duffel bag at his feet. My mom was standing in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself as if she was holding her body together. "You can't just leave, Silas," she whispered, her voice raw. "What are we going to do?" He didn't even look at her. He just scoffed, a bitter, ugly sound. "That's your problem now. I'm done. I'm done with this pathetic life, done with this town, and done with you." He turned his head slightly, and his eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no sadness in them, no regret, just a cold, hard emptiness. Then he turned, opened the door, and walked out without another word. The sound of the door clicking shut was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The official end of my childhood. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My mom stood frozen for a long time before she finally crumpled onto the worn-out floral couch, her shoulders shaking with sobs that made no sound. I didn't know what to do, so I just walked over and put my small hand on her back. Later that night, after I had cried myself to sleep, I woke up thirsty. I tiptoed to the kitchen, trying not to wake my mom, who had passed out from exhaustion on the couch. As I got a glass of water, I noticed the kitchen cupboard was slightly ajar, the one where my mom kept her emergency tin. It was an old coffee can where she'd stash away any spare dollars she got from tips at the diner. She called it our rainy day fund. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled a chair over, climbed up, and reached for the tin. Felt light. Too light. I pulled off the plastic lid. It was empty. Every last dollar was gone. A cold dread washed over me, a realization that was too heavy for a 9-year-old to bear. He hadn't just left us. He had robbed us. He had taken the last little bit of security we had in the world and walked out the door with it, leaving us with nothing but the echo of his cruelty. That night, I learned a lesson that would shape the rest of my life. You can't depend on anyone but yourself. The weeks after Silas left were a blur of confusion and fear. With our emergency money gone, things got desperate, fast. The landlord started knocking on our door, his voice getting louder each time. The electricity was shut off twice. I remember doing my homework by candlelight, the flickering flame making shadows dance on the page. My mom, Alara, seemed to age a decade in a month. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a constant, weary anxiety. But she never broke. Not in front of me, anyway. She took on a second job, cleaning offices late at night after her shift at the diner. She'd leave before I woke up and come home long after I was asleep. Some days, the only time I'd see her was when she'd peek into my room before she left for her night job, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. Her hands, which were always soft, became rough and red from the harsh cleaning chemicals. I tried to be strong for her. I learned to make my own breakfast, usually just cereal with water, because we often couldn't afford milk. I made sure my homework was done and my room was clean, anything to take one small burden off her shoulders. But I felt so helpless watching her work herself to the bone. When I turned 13, I decided I couldn't just stand by anymore. I got a paper route, waking up at 5 a.m. every morning to bike around the neighborhood, slinging newspapers onto porches in the pre-dawn chill. The money wasn't much, maybe $40 or $50 a week, but to us it was a lifeline. I'll never forget the first time I handed her my earnings. I just walked into the kitchen and put the crumpled bills and coins on the table. She looked at the money, then at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Ronan," she said, her voice thick with a mix of pride and pain. "You shouldn't have to do this. You're just a kid." "We're a team, Mom," I said, puffing out my chest to seem older than I was. "We've got to stick together." She pulled me into a hug, her tired body trembling slightly. She didn't say anything else, but in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. We had each other. My paper route money soon turned into money from mowing lawns, and then from stocking shelves at the corner grocery store after school. Every dollar I made went into a new coffee tin, our new rainy day fund. I'd secretly slip cash into her purse when she wasn't looking, and she'd pretend not to notice. It was our silent agreement, our way of fighting back against the world that had tried to break us. We were barely surviving, living from one paycheck to the next, but we were doing it together. Her sacrifice fueled my determination, and my small contributions gave her a flicker of hope. In that tiny, rundown house, we forged a bond that was stronger than any hardship. High school was my escape. While other kids were going to football games or worrying about prom dates, I was in the library, buried in books. I knew, with a certainty that burned in my gut, that education was my only way out. Math and science became my refuge. Numbers made sense. They were logical, predictable. Unlike people, they never lied or walked out on you. I joined the math club, the coding club, anything that would keep me at school longer and fill my head with something other than the constant worry about our next meal. My guidance counselor, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, saw the fire in me. He saw me staying late after school, poring over calculus problems long after everyone else had gone home. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "Ronan," he said, looking at me over his glasses. "Have you thought about what you're going to do after graduation?" I shrugged. "Get a full-time job at the factory, I guess. Help my mom." He shook his head. "No, you're capable of more than that. Much more." He pushed a stack of pamphlets across his desk. They were for college scholarships. "Your grades are exceptional. If you work hard, you could get a full ride." A full ride. The idea seemed as foreign as flying to the moon. College was for rich kids, not for someone who had to choose between buying a textbook or helping pay the electric bill. But Mr. Henderson's belief in me planted a seed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one that wasn't defined by the limits of my small town. The next year and a half was a relentless grind. I studied until my eyes burned. I took every advanced placement class I could. I wrote dozens of scholarship essays, pouring my story onto the page. And it paid off. At 17, I won a full-ride scholarship to the University of Texas for data analytics. The day the acceptance letter came, my mom and I just held each other in the living room and cried. It was our ticket out. But even with tuition covered, college was a struggle. I was on my own for everything else. Rent, books, food. I worked 3 jobs to stay afloat. I was a busboy at a campus diner, dodging spilled coffee while mentally running through lines of code. On weekends, I worked as a filing clerk at a small law firm, the scent of old paper and dusty legal books forever ingrained in my memory. At night, I cleaned offices, the monotonous motion of wiping down desks giving me time to think. I was always tired. I lived on cheap coffee and instant noodles. But I never complained. Every exam I aced, every project I completed, felt like a victory. It was proof that I was more than my past. I was the architect of my own future, and I was building it one grueling, exhausting step at a time. Graduating from college felt like breaking the surface after holding my breath for 4 years. I had my degree, a stack of academic awards, and, most importantly, a job offer from a tech company in Austin. Moving there was like stepping into another dimension. The energy of the city, its booming tech scene, it was everything my old life wasn't. It was a fresh start, a clean slate. I started as a junior analyst, the lowest rung on the ladder. But I was hungry. I remembered the feeling of an empty stomach, the chill of a house with no heat. That memory was my fuel. I poured everything I had into my work. I was the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I took on the projects nobody else wanted. I studied on weekends, constantly improving my skills. Within 5 years, I had climbed the ladder to a senior role, leading my own team and earning a salary that felt like a lottery win compared to my childhood. The promotion came with a significant pay raise, and the first thing I did was call my mom. As soon as my income stabilized, I started sending money home. At first, it was $500 a month, then $1,000. I wanted to give my mom, Alara, the peace she had never had. I wanted her to stop worrying about the next bill, the next rent payment. I'll never forget the day I bought her a house. It wasn't huge, just a small, 2-bedroom cottage with a garden in the back. In a quiet neighborhood a few towns over from where we used to live. I flew back to Ohio to surprise her. I pulled up to her cramped apartment building and told her I wanted to take her for a drive. When we arrived in front of the little blue house with the white picket fence, she just looked at me, confused. "It's beautiful, Ronan," she said. "Whose house is this?" I pulled a key out of my pocket and pressed it into her hand. "It's yours, Mom." The look on her face was something I will cherish for the rest of my life. The tears streamed down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness or exhaustion. They were tears of pure joy. We walked through the empty rooms, her hand trailing along the freshly painted walls. When we got to the backyard, she stood in the middle of the grass, closed her eyes, and just breathed. "You know, son," she said, her voice soft, "you've given me more than your father ever took away." That single moment made every sleepless night, every sacrifice, worth it. It was the fulfillment of a silent promise I had made to myself as a boy, standing in a cold kitchen, staring at an empty coffee tin. I had taken care of my mom. We were safe. We were finally truly safe. The man at my door, my father, looked older, of course. His hair was thinner and grayer, and his face was a roadmap of lines I couldn't read. But the posture was the same, that slight, arrogant tilt of the head, the casual confidence of a man who believes the world owes him something. His name was Silas. For 23 years, it had been a name I only spoke in my head, a word that tasted like ash. "Ronan," he said, his voice a gravelly tone I barely recognized. He spread his arms wide, a grand, theatrical gesture, as if he expected me to fall into them. "My boy, look at you, all grown up." I didn't move. I just stood there in the doorway, my body rigid, my hands still gripping the doorknob. The young woman beside him, my half-sister, Kasia, finally looked up from her phone. She scanned me from head to toe, her eyes lingering on my clothes, my watch. A flicker of something, disdain, maybe, or appraisal, crossed her face before she went back to scrolling. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Silas asked, his smile faltering slightly at my silence. My mind was screaming at me to slam the door, to lock it, to pretend this wasn't happening. But another part of me, a small, foolish part, was curious. What did he want? Why now, after all this time? Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let them in. They walked into my living room, and the space immediately felt alien, contaminated. My carefully curated peace was shattered. Silas's eyes darted around, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern furniture, the expensive sound system. It was the look of a predator sizing up its prey. "Nice place you've got here," he said, running a hand over the back of my leather couch. "Must be doing pretty well for yourself. I always knew you had it in you." The hypocrisy of that statement was staggering. He had no idea what I had in me. He hadn't been there for any of it. Kasia flopped onto the couch, propping her designer sneakers up on my coffee table without a second thought. "The Wi-Fi password?" she asked, not to me specifically, but to the room in general. I ignored her and looked at Silas. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. I wasn't going to play games. His charming facade returned. He sat down, leaning forward conspiratorially. "To see you, son. To reconnect. A man gets to a certain age, he starts thinking about family, about the mistakes he's made. I've missed you, Ronan. I really have." His words were smooth, practiced. They sounded like lines from a movie, hollow and insincere. I had spent years imagining this moment, wondering what I would say, what I would feel. I thought I would feel anger, rage. But all I felt was a strange, hollow emptiness and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't a reunion. This was an invasion. And I had a terrible feeling it was only the beginning. I didn't offer them anything to drink. I just stood by the kitchen counter, my arms crossed, creating a physical barrier between us. I needed to keep my distance, to keep my head clear. Silas launched into his performance, a masterclass in manipulation. "I know what you must be thinking," he began, his voice taking on a somber, regretful tone. "Why I left. Why I wasn't there for you." He sighed, a heavy, dramatic sound. "It's a long story, son. Complicated one. Your mother and I, we just weren't right for each other. And the truth is, I was sick." My eyes narrowed. "Sick. Very sick," he said, nodding gravely. He coughed, a dry, deliberate little hack into his fist. "The doctors, they didn't think I had long. A rare heart condition. I didn't want you to see me waste away. I thought it would be easier for you if I just disappeared. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, leaving you and your mother. It broke me." He painted a picture of a tragic, self-sacrificing hero, a man who had walked away from his family for their own good. He claimed he'd spent years battling this mysterious illness, living in poverty, always thinking of me. It was a good story, well rehearsed, but it was full of holes. "And now?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "The heart condition? Oh, it's back," he said, pressing a hand to his chest as if on cue. "Worse than before." The doctors say there's an experimental treatment, but the cost, it's astronomical. We've sold everything we have. While he was delivering his monologue, Kasia was fidgeting impatiently. She let out an exasperated sigh. Dad, can you just get to the point? I'm missing the season finale of my show. She looked at me. We were just in Cancun last month for his birthday, and the Wi-Fi at that resort was terrible. I hope yours is better. Silence. The air in the room went still. Silas shot her a look that was pure venom. He had been carefully constructing this image of a destitute, dying man, and she had just bulldozed it with a single careless comment about a luxury vacation. He recovered quickly, forcing a pained smile. A gift, he said, waving a dismissive hand. From my wife's family. A final trip before, well, they wanted me to have one last good memory. He tried to steer the conversation back to his failing health, his voice becoming more desperate, more pleading. But the damage was done. The lie had been exposed, as clear and obvious as the designer logo on Kasia's handbag. My last, lingering shred of doubt vanished. This wasn't about reconnecting. This wasn't about regret. It was about money. He had heard I was successful, and he had come to collect, armed with a sob story and a spoiled, clueless accomplice. A cold, hard anger began to replace the emptiness inside me. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a con artist, and I was his next mark. A few days later, after a series of pleading text messages from Silas, I agreed to meet them. Not because I believed him, but because I wanted to see how far he would take this charade. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I chose a busy, upscale restaurant downtown, a neutral public space where he couldn't create a scene. They were already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table. Silas was wearing a blazer that looked a little too tight, trying to project an image of success that didn't quite fit. Kasia was on her phone. As usual, a bored expression on her face. I sat down and skipped the small talk. You said you wanted to talk. So talk. Silas's smile was oily. Straight to business. I like that. You get that from me, you know? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Ronan, as I told you, I'm in a desperate situation. The medical bills are piling up. I wouldn't ask if there was any other way, but you're my only hope. How much? I asked. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. The treatment costs $80,000. $80,000. The number just hung in the air between us. It was a staggering amount, said with such casual entitlement it took my breath away. Before I could even process it, Kasia chimed in, not even bothering to look up from her phone. And I need a car, she said. I'm starting college in the spring, and I can't be seen taking the bus. Something decent like a Lexus. And my college fund is looking a little light, too. I stared at her, then back at Silas, my disbelief turning into a cold fury. They weren't even trying to be subtle. This was a shakedown, pure and simple. So, let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You want $80,000 for a fake medical treatment, plus a luxury car and college tuition for your daughter, who I've known for all of 5 minutes. Silas's facade of the desperate father began to crack. His eyes hardened. It's not a fake treatment, and she's your sister. This is what family does. We help each other out. You're sitting on a mountain of cash. Ronan, I've heard all about your big shot job, your high salary. It's not going to kill you to share a little of it. How? I asked, leaning forward. How did you hear about my job? He waved his hand dismissively. The world is a small place. People talk. But his eyes flickered away for a second, a telltale sign of a lie. I looked at these two strangers who shared my blood but nothing else. One was a pathological liar, the other a spoiled brat. They had come back into my life not with apologies or explanations, but with an invoice. An invoice for a childhood I never had, for a father I never knew. Family, I repeated, the word tasting like poison. You want to talk about family? Where was this family when my mom was working 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads? Where were you when I was delivering newspapers in the snow to help pay for groceries? I pushed my chair back from the table. The answer is no. Silas's face contorted with rage. You owe me, boy, he hissed, his voice low and menacing. I gave you life. You gave me nothing. I shot back, my voice rising. Everything I have, I earned. In spite of you, not because of you. I threw $100 bill on the table to cover their meal. Consider this my final contribution to the family. Don't contact me again. I walked out of that restaurant with my heart pounding in my chest. It was a strange mix of anger, disgust, and a bizarre sense of relief. The final, definitive confirmation that Silas hadn't changed at all was liberating in a way. There were no more what-ifs, no more lingering questions. He was exactly the selfish, manipulative person I remembered. I spent the next day trying to put it out of my mind. I went to work, focused on my projects, and even went for a beer with Leo after we clocked out. I told him a sanitized version of the story, just that my estranged father had shown up looking for money. Dude, that's rough, Leo said, shaking his head. Some people have no shame. Just cut him off. You don't owe him anything. His simple, direct advice was exactly what I needed to hear. He was right. I didn't know Silas a thing. I decided then and there to block his number and move on with my life. But it wasn't going to be that easy. The next afternoon, my apartment buzzer rang. It was them. Again. What part of "don't contact me again" did you not understand? I snapped into the intercom. Ronan, please, just 5 minutes, Silas's voice pleaded. We just want to talk. To apologize for how things went yesterday. I knew it was a lie. I knew I should just hang up. But I also knew they wouldn't leave. They would probably just sit in the lobby making a scene. Annoyed, and wanting to get it over with, I buzzed them up. The moment they stepped into my apartment, the atmosphere shifted. The pleading act was gone. Silas's face was a hard mask of resentment. Kasia looked even more sullen than usual. You embarrassed me yesterday, Silas spat, not even bothering with a hello. In a public place. After all I've done for you. I laughed. A short, humorless sound. Done for me? You abandoned me. You stole from my mother. You've done nothing. His face twisted into an ugly sneer. I gave you your ambition, boy. If I had stuck around, coddled you, you'd be nothing. You'd be a failure just like your mother, working at some greasy spoon diner for tips. The insult to my mom hit a raw nerve. Don't you dare talk about her, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low. I took a step toward him. She worked her fingers to the bone to give me a life you were too cowardly to provide. She's worth 10 of you. Kasia, who had been silent, suddenly scoffed. Please, she's a broke old woman in a tiny house. We saw it on Zillow. My dad was smart to get out when he did. That was it. The absolute final straw. The cold, calculated cruelty of it. They hadn't just come for money. They had come to tear down everything I held sacred. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with rage. I pointed to the door. Get out of my house now before I call the police. Silas's eyes widened for a second. A flash of surprise, maybe even fear, but it was quickly replaced by a cold fury. You'll regret this, Ronan, he warned, his voice a low hiss. You think you're so high and mighty in your glass tower. But people in glass towers are very easy to break. You have no idea who you're dealing with. He grabbed Kasia's arm and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. I stood there, trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it felt like it was going to burn me up from the inside out. This was no longer just about money. This was a war. After they left, an unnerving silence fell over the apartment. Felt tainted, violated. I walked through the rooms, a strange feeling of unease crawling up my spine. Something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the feeling was undeniable. I went to my home office, a small room where I kept my personal computer and work files. That's when I saw it. My laptop, which I always left closed and sleeping, was open. The screen was on, displaying my desktop. Cold knot formed in my stomach. I never left it open. Ever. My mind raced back. Had they been here before? No, that was impossible. Then it hit me. That first day they came, I had left them in the living room for a minute. When I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, my back turned to them. It was only for a minute, maybe less, but it was long enough. My hands shaking slightly, I sat down at my desk. I checked the browser history. There were searches for my company's executive board, for my social media profiles, and my heart sank for local Austin banks. Then I opened the File Explorer. The recent files list showed that several documents had been opened. Tax returns, investment statements, pay stubs. They had gone through everything. I felt a wave of nausea. The invasion of privacy was so profound, so absolute. It felt like they had reached into my life and rummaged through its most private corners. This wasn't just a desperate grab for cash. This was a calculated intelligence-gathering operation. Then I decided to check my home security system. I had a small camera in the living room, mostly for when I was out of town. I scrolled back through the footage from the day they first visited. And there it was. The moment I walked into the kitchen, Kasia, quick as a snake, got up and slipped into my office. Silas stood up and moved to block the doorway, pretending to admire a piece of art on the wall, keeping a lookout. I watched, my blood running cold, as the footage showed Kasia at my desk, her fingers flying across my keyboard. She was in and out in less than 45 seconds. She knew exactly what she was looking for. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment idea. It was planned. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They had come to my home under the guise of a family reunion with the sole intention of digging up financial dirt on me. Every word Silas had said, the regret, the illness, the pleas for connection. It was all a lie, a carefully constructed performance to distract me while his daughter rifled through my life. The anger I felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a different kind of fury, cold, clear, and absolute. They hadn't just insulted me or tried to guilt me. They had conspired against me. They had trespassed not just into my home, but into the very fabric of the life I had built. I saved the security footage to a secure drive. This was no longer a family dispute. This was evidence. The security footage was damning, but I had a sickening feeling there was more to it. How did they know where to look? How did they know so much about me to even begin their search? The phrase Silas had used kept replaying in my mind. I've heard all about your big shot job. It wasn't just a lucky guess. I sat at my computer, my mind, now in full analyst mode, running through the possibilities. They had to have gotten a tip. But from who? I had very few connections left to my old life in Ohio, and none of them knew the specifics of my financial situation. Driven by a hunch, I started digging deeper into my own digital footprint. I logged into my secondary email account, one I rarely used, mostly for junk mail. And that's where I found it. Buried in the spam folder was an email from months ago. The subject line was innocuous. Following up. The sender was an email address I didn't recognize. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. The email was short. Hello. I am a former colleague of Silas from his time in Ohio. He mentioned he was trying to get in touch with his son, Ronan, who I believe works at your company. I found this information in a public directory and thought it might be helpful. Attached was a single file. My hand trembled as I downloaded and opened it. It was a PDF, an internal, non-public employee directory from a partner company that my firm frequently collaborated with. And there, on page 27, was my name, my job title, and my estimated salary band. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't a random occurrence. Silas had been planning this for months. He had methodically reached out to old contacts, leveraging a story about a father trying to reconnect with his son, to socially engineer his way into getting sensitive information about me. He wasn't just an opportunistic grifter. He was a meticulous con man. But who was this former colleague? I did a reverse lookup on the email address. The name that came back was someone I vaguely remembered, a man who had worked with Silas for a short time at a construction company before Silas was fired for stealing materials. He was an accomplice. This discovery changed everything. It recontextualized their entire visit. The feigned illness, the sob stories, they were all part of a calculated plot, built on a foundation of illegally obtained information. They had come to my door armed with my salary information, ready to play whatever part was necessary to get a piece of it. I felt a profound sense of violation, far deeper than just having my files looked at. My success, something I had worked so hard for, had been turned into a target on my back. Silas hadn't just found me by chance. He had hunted me down. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. The anger was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. But now it was accompanied by something else, clarity. I knew exactly what I was up bundan sonra, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to fight back. And I was going to use the same tools they used against me, information and strategy. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in, telling my boss I had a serious family emergency, which wasn't a lie. My first call was to my mom. I told her everything. Silas's reappearance, the lies, the financial demands, and the invasion of my privacy. Her reaction was a quiet, weary sadness. "I'm so sorry, Ronan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I had hoped you would never have to see him again. He doesn't change. He only knows how to take." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "But I'm not going to let him do this. I'm going to handle it." My next call was to a lawyer. I didn't want some small-town family lawyer. I needed someone who understood harassment and cybercrime. I found a top-rated firm in Austin and scheduled an emergency consultation with a partner named Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett's office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world away from the chaos of my life. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 60s with eyes that seemed to see right through you. I laid everything out on his polished mahogany table. A printed copy of the email with my salary information, a USB drive with the security camera footage, and screenshots of the recent files on my computer. He listened intently, not interrupting once. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mr. Foster," he said, his voice calm and measured, "this is not a simple family squabble. This is a clear pattern of harassment, conspiracy, and illegal access to private information. They haven't just crossed a line, they've pole vaulted over it." His confidence was exactly what I needed. He laid out a plan. The first step was immediate and aggressive, a temporary restraining order. "We will file this afternoon," he said. "Given your evidence, especially the video, a judge will almost certainly grant it. It will legally bar them from contacting you, coming near your home, or your place of work." The process was draining. I had to write a detailed declaration, recounting every interaction, every threat. It felt like reliving the whole nightmare. But with Mr. Bennett guiding me, I got through it. 2 days later, we were in front of a judge. Silas and Kasia were there, looking bewildered and indignant. Silas tried to play the victim, telling the judge he was just a concerned father trying to see his son. Then Mr. Bennett played the security footage on a large screen in the courtroom. The video of Silas acting as a lookout while Kasia rifled through my office. The courtroom was silent. Silas's face went pale. The judge didn't hesitate. He granted the temporary restraining order and set a date for a hearing to make it permanent. As we left the courthouse, Silas glared at me. His eyes filled with a venomous hatred. He didn't say a word, but his expression was clear. This wasn't over. I felt a sense of relief, but it was fragile. The restraining order was a piece of paper, a legal shield. But I knew it wouldn't stop a man like Silas. It would only make him angrier and more determined. I had built a fortress of laws around me, but I had a feeling the war was just beginning. For a few weeks, there was silence. Blessed, wonderful silence. The permanent restraining order was granted without a hitch. Silas and Kasia didn't even show up for the final hearing. I started to relax. I changed the locks on my apartment, upgraded my security system, and put flags on all my financial accounts. I thought I had successfully excised them from my life, like a surgeon removing a tumor. I thought I had won. I was wrong. The attack, when it came, was from a direction I never expected. It wasn't aimed at my wallet. It was aimed at my entire life. It started subtly. A project I was leading at work suddenly hit a snag with another department. A colleague I was friendly with started acting distant, avoiding eye contact in the hallway. Then my boss, a man named Frank who had always been my biggest supporter, called me into his office for an unscheduled check-in. The mood was tense. Frank, who was usually relaxed and open, seemed uncomfortable. He shifted papers around on his desk, avoiding my gaze. "Ronan," he began, his voice formal. "We've, received some concerning correspondence regarding your employment here." My blood ran cold. "Correspondence? What are you talking about?" He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of an anonymous email. I read the first few lines and my stomach dropped. The email was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of malicious slander. It claimed that I had falsified credentials on my resume. It alleged that I had a history of unstable behavior and had been fired from a previous job for corporate espionage. Painted me as a dangerous fraud, a liability to the company. "There have been several of these," Frank said, his voice heavy, "sent to various members of the senior leadership team and HR, all from different anonymous accounts." I was speechless. My mind was reeling, but I knew with absolute certainty who was behind this. Silas. This was his revenge. He couldn't get my money, so he was trying to destroy my career, the very foundation of the life I had built. His threat in my apartment echoed in my ears. "People in glass towers are very easy to break." "Frank, this is all lies," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and panic. "This is my estranged father. I have a restraining order against him. He's doing this to retaliate." Frank held up a hand. "I believe you, Ronan, or at least I want to. You've been an exemplary employee, but you have to understand our position. These are serious allegations. We have to investigate. According to company policy, until this is resolved, I have to place you on paid administrative leave." Administrative leave. The words felt like a punch to the gut. It was a corporate purgatory. I was being sent home, sidelined, while the company investigated these baseless claims. I had to hand over my company laptop and my security badge. As I walked out of the building, carrying my personal belongings in a cardboard box like a common criminal, I felt the eyes of my colleagues on me. In a matter of days, Silas had turned my sanctuary into a prison and my reputation into dust. I drove home in a daze. The legal fortress I had built was useless against this kind of attack. How do you fight a ghost? How do you disprove a lie that's spreading like poison? He had found my greatest vulnerability. He knew my career was everything to me, and he was trying to burn it to the ground. I sat in my silent apartment, the city lights twinkling outside, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt utterly, hopelessly defeated. The first 48 hours of my administrative leave were some of the darkest of my life. I paced my apartment like a caged animal, a storm of fury and helplessness raging inside me. I felt powerless. Silas was a phantom, hiding behind anonymous email addresses, and I was stuck in limbo, unable to defend myself. My friends called, but I ignored them. My mom called, and I gave her a vague, reassuring answer, not wanting her to worry. I just sat in the dark, the silence of my apartment a mocking reminder of my isolation. Then, on the third day, something shifted. I was staring at my personal laptop, the one Kasia had snooped on, when a spark of an idea ignited in the darkness. I was a data analyst. My entire career was built on finding patterns, uncovering truths, and tracing information to its source. Why was I sitting here like a victim when I had the skills to fight back? Silas thought he was being clever using anonymous accounts, but the digital world always leaves footprints. Always. A new kind of energy surged through me. Not the hot rage of before, but a cold, focused determination. I turned my apartment into a command center. I brewed a large pot of coffee, put on some instrumental music to help me focus, and got to work. My company had, for legal reasons, provided me with copies of the anonymous emails. That was my starting point. I began by analyzing the email headers. To a normal person, it's just a block of technical gibberish. To me, it was a treasure map. I started tracing the path each email took through the internet servers. Most of the early ones were sent through common VPNs, masking their true origin. He was covering his tracks. But then I found a mistake. One of the later emails, one sent in a fit of anger perhaps, had a less secure origin. The header contained a real, unmasked IP address. An IP address is a unique identifier for an internet connection, like a digital fingerprint. I ran the IP address through a geolocation database. The result popped up on my screen. A small, independent coffee shop called The Daily Grind in a town just outside of Houston, where I knew Silas was living. It was a lead, but it wasn't enough. An IP address from a public place could belong to anyone. I needed to connect it directly to him or Kasia. I started thinking about his accomplice, his daughter. Kasia was young, arrogant, and lived her life online. I found her public social media profiles easily. Her Instagram was a curated feed of selfies, expensive meals, and complaints about being bored. I started meticulously scrolling through months of her posts, cross-referencing the dates and times with the emails my company had received. And then I found it. A post from 3 weeks ago. It was a selfie of her holding a ridiculously overpriced latte, pouting at the camera. The caption read, "Stuck running errands with my dad. So boring. At least the coffee here is decent." I checked the timestamp of the post. It was sent at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I checked the timestamp on the email with the unmasked IP address. It was sent at 2:23 p.m. on the same Tuesday, from the same coffee shop. I zoomed in on the photo. In the reflection of her sunglasses, faint but unmistakable, was the image of a man sitting across from her, hunched over a laptop. A man with thinning gray hair, wearing a familiar-looking blazer. Silas. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had them. It was the digital smoking gun. It was concrete, irrefutable proof that linked them directly to the slander campaign. He thought he was a ghost, but he had no idea. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to bury him with the truth. Armed with my evidence, I called Mr. Bennett. When I explained what I had found, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ronan," he finally said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice. "That's not just good work. That's brilliant. This changes everything. This is no longer just a case of harassment. It's defamation, libel, and tortious interference. We can destroy them with this." He suggested we sue them into oblivion. But I had a different idea. A lawsuit would be long, public, and messy. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of dragging my name through the mud any further. I wanted a swift, decisive end. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he had been outplayed. "I want to arrange a meeting," I told Mr. Bennett, "with you present. I want to show him my evidence and give him an ultimatum." Mr. Bennett was hesitant at first, but he saw the cold resolve in my eyes and agreed. He sent a formal letter to Silas and Kasia, summoning them to his office for a mediation regarding recent legal matters. I'm sure they thought it was about the restraining order, that they could just ignore it or lie their way through it. They had no idea what was waiting for them. 2 days later, I was sitting in Mr. Bennett's conference room, the one with the panoramic view of the city. I felt strangely calm. The fear and helplessness were gone, replaced by an icy certainty. Mr. Bennett sat beside me, a thick folder of my evidence on the table in front of him. Silas and Kasia walked in, radiating an aura of defiant arrogance. Silas looked at me with pure contempt. "What is this all about?" he demanded, looking at Mr. Bennett. "We have nothing to say to him." Mr. Bennett didn't say a word. He just opened the folder, turned it around, and pushed it across the table. On the top was an 8 by 10 glossy printout of Kasia's Instagram post. Next to it was a printout of the anonymous email, with the timestamp and IP address highlighted. And underneath that, a zoomed-in, enhanced photo of Silas's reflection in Kasia's sunglasses. I watched their faces as they processed what they were seeing. Kasia's jaw went slack, the color draining from her face. Silas stared at the photos, his arrogant smirk melting away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. The hunter had just realized he'd walked into a trap. "How?" he whispered, the single word barely audible. You're not the only one who knows how to find things out, I said, my voice even and cold. You sent a dozen emails to my employer, filled with lies trying to ruin my life. You violated a restraining order by harassing me through a third party. You committed libel. Mr. Bennett seems to think we have a very strong case. Silas was speechless. He just stared at the evidence, the wheels turning in his head, finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. So here's the deal, I continued, leaning forward. You have two options. Option A. We walk out of this room, and Mr. Bennett files a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against you for defamation and damages. We will submit all of this evidence. We will win. You will be financially ruined for the rest of your life. Option B. You sign a legally binding confession, admitting to everything you've done. You will state in writing that every allegation you made against me was a malicious lie. You will agree to never, ever contact me or my family again, in any form. If you do, the confession gets filed with the court and you go to jail. You have 5 minutes to decide. I leaned back in my chair. The power in the room had shifted completely. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the victim. I was in control. The silence in that conference room was absolute. Silas just stared at the papers, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in his own cleverness. Now he was cornered, exposed, and powerless. Kasia was on the verge of tears, looking at her father as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a cunning mastermind, but as a pathetic failure who had dragged her into a disaster. This is blackmail, Silas finally croaked, his voice raspy. Mr. Bennett spoke for the first time, his tone like ice. No, sir. This is a settlement offer. Blackmail is what you do with lies. This is what we do with the truth. You have 3 minutes left. I could see the war raging in Silas's eyes. His pride was fighting against his instinct for self-preservation. But in the end, his cowardice won. He knew he was beaten. He knew I had him dead to rights. With a hand that trembled with rage, he picked up the pen Mr. Bennett had placed on the table. Where do I sign? He muttered, the words tasting like defeat. He signed the confession. Kasia, sobbing quietly, signed as a witness. The document was a full admission of his slander campaign, a detailed account of his malicious lies, all designed to get me fired as revenge. It was his ultimate humiliation, written and signed in his own hand. Mr. Bennett took the signed document and made a copy. He handed one to me. It's done, he said. Silas and Kasia stood up to leave. Silas wouldn't look at me. As he walked past, he stopped for a moment. You think you're so smart, he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. No, I replied, looking him straight in the eye. I just learned from the best. You taught me that the world can be a cruel place. So I learned how to be strong enough to face it. Goodbye, Silas. They walked out of the office and out of my life, forever. I stood at the window, holding the signed confession, and looked out over the city. A massive weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying lifted from my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. The next day, I walked into my boss Frank's office and placed the signed confession on his desk. He read it, his eyes getting wider with every sentence. When he was done, he looked up at me, his face a mixture of shock and remorse. Ronan, I am so sorry, he said. We should have never doubted you. I was immediately reinstated. The company issued a formal apology. And 2 weeks later, as a further gesture of their confidence in me, they offered me a significant promotion, the one I had been working toward for the past year. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been delivered with interest. I had faced the ghosts of my past, fought them on my own terms, and won. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. After the storm, there was calm, a kind of deep, profound peace I had never known before. The world seemed brighter, the air cleaner. With Silas and Kasia permanently out of my life, and my name cleared at work, I felt like I could finally, truly breathe. The promotion was a turning point. It came with more responsibility and a new team to manage, which forced me to engage and connect with my colleagues in a way I hadn't before. The ordeal had, strangely, broken down the walls I had built around myself. My coworkers, having seen me vindicated, treated me with a new level of respect and warmth. The whispers and side glances were replaced with smiles and invitations to lunch. Leo, Maya, and Ben were, of course, overjoyed and threw me a small welcome-back party at my apartment. We ordered pizza, drank cheap beer, and for the first time I told them the whole unvarnished story. Seeing the unwavering support in my friends' eyes made me realize I wasn't as alone as I had always felt. But I knew that winning the battle wasn't the same as healing the wounds. The anger and resentment had subsided, but decades of hurt had left deep scars. On the recommendation of a trusted colleague, I started seeing a therapist, a thoughtful man named Dr. Alistair Finch. Our first few sessions were tough. I was used to bottling things up, to dealing with problems through logic and analysis. Talking about feelings felt foreign and uncomfortable. But Dr. Finch was patient. He helped me unpack the tangled mess of emotions left by my father's abandonment and his recent reappearance. "You've spent your entire life in survival mode, Ronan," he told me in one session. "You built armor to protect yourself as a child, and it served you well. But now you're safe. You don't need the armor anymore. It's time to learn how to put it down." Through months of work, I began to understand. I learned that my relentless drive for success wasn't just about ambition. It was about trying to prove my worth to a father who had made me feel worthless. I learned to separate my own value from my salary or my job title. I started to forgive the 9-year-old boy who couldn't stop his father from leaving. Inspired by my own journey, I decided to do something more. I used a portion of my promotion bonus to establish a small scholarship fund at my old high school. It was named after my mom, the Alara Foster Opportunity Grant, dedicated to helping kids from low-income, single-parent homes get a head start in college. It was my way of turning my pain into purpose, of ensuring that other kids, who started with nothing, knew that they weren't invisible. I was reclaiming my story, not as a tragedy of abandonment, but as a testament to resilience. And for the first time, I felt truly free. About a year after the final confrontation, I got an unexpected phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize with an Ohio area code. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Ronan?" A hesitant voice on the other end said. "It's Orson, your uncle, Silas's younger brother." I hadn't spoken to my Uncle Orson in over 20 years. He was a quiet, decent man who had always been overshadowed by his domineering older brother. We had exchanged a few Christmas cards after Silas left, but we had eventually lost touch. "Uncle Orson," I said, surprised. "It's been a long time. Is everything okay?" There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "Not really, son. Not for Silas, anyway. I thought you should know." He proceeded to tell me what had happened after Silas and Kasia had left Mr. Bennett's office in disgrace. Their world had completely unraveled. Silas's second wife, Kasia's mother, was a woman who valued appearances and money above all else. When she found out about his failed scheme and the legal trouble he was in, she was furious. Not because he had been cruel or dishonest, but because he had failed. He was no longer an asset, he was a liability. She filed for divorce and threw him out of the house. Kasia, who had been raised in a world of privilege and entitlement, had no loyalty to a father who could no longer fund her lifestyle. According to Orson, she had sided with her mother during the divorce, securing her own financial future and cutting Silas off completely. She had dropped out of college and was now living off her mother's settlement, posting photos from yachts and exclusive clubs, without a single mention of her father. "And Silas?" I asked, a strange detachment in my voice. "It's not a pretty picture," Orson said. "He lost everything. The house, the money. He's living in a cheap motel on the edge of town. His health, that story he told you about his heart condition? It's ironic, but the stress of all this seems to have made it come true. He really is sick now, and he's all alone. Nobody wants anything to do with him after the truth about what he did to you got out." I listened to the story, and I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I didn't feel schadenfreude. I just felt nothing. A profound and utter emptiness where my anger used to be. It was the final confirmation that he was no longer a part of my emotional landscape. His fate was the direct result of his own choices. It was the logical conclusion to a life built on greed and deceit. He had sown the wind, and now he was reaping the whirlwind. Karma, I suppose, is the most accurate data analyst of all. It always finds the pattern. It always delivers the truth. Tonight, my apartment is filled with warmth and laughter, a sound that has become wonderfully familiar. The city skyline still glitters outside my window, but the view is no longer the most valuable thing I own. My mom, Alara, is here, visiting for the week. She's sitting on the couch, telling a funny story to my girlfriend, Sarah, who is laughing so hard she's wiping tears from her eyes. My friends, Leo, Maya, and Ben, are in the kitchen, arguing good-naturedly over who makes the best guacamole. The smell of roasting chicken fills the air. My home, once a silent sanctuary from the world, has become a place of connection, a place filled with love. Looking around at these faces, I feel a wave of gratitude so powerful it almost brings me to my knees. These people are my family, not by blood necessarily, but by choice. They are the ones who showed up, the ones who stayed, the ones who celebrated my victories and supported me through my darkest hours, asking for nothing in return. They are the ones who taught me what family truly means. My mother catches my eye from across the room and gives me a smile. It's a smile that says everything. That she's proud, that she's happy, that we made it. We survived the storm and found our way to the calm on the other side. The past will always be a part of my story. It's the foundation upon which I built my strength, the darkness that taught me to appreciate the light. But it no longer defines me. The ghost of Silas is gone, replaced by the living, breathing presence of people who truly care for me. My journey was a long and painful one, but it led me here, to this moment, surrounded by love and laughter. And it taught me the most important lesson of all. Family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. It's the people who choose you, who respect you, who stand by you. It's a choice you make every day to show up for the people who matter. And it's the most important choice you will ever make. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with you all. I'd love to hear your own thoughts. What does the word family mean to you? Please share your stories and feelings in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel for more.